Ahoy and welcome, this is Admiral.
Wololo.
Today we're revisiting the concept of ranged villagers who are bright enough to use their hunting bows as war bows. I say revisiting because I have touched on the topic before, although that was in the comparative dark ages of this channel, before I was writing and recording scripts, and generally making less stimulating content as I eased into the world of YouTube and video editing. So I want to return to this idea in a more thorough way, as is fitting for such a compelling concept. As often, I'll be considering this as a possible civilization bonus or unique technology. To set some bounds around the discussion, I think that many of you will agree that this ability is too strong to be given freely and at its full effect in the Dark or early Feudal Age, assuming the normal villager attack value of 3 damage, but also at a range of 3 as hunters have. This lends itself too easily to cheesy tactics like tower rushes with ranged villager support, or even Dark Age villager rushes that would be annoying and would have little counterplay, as this would be the earliest available ranged unit in the game. On the other hand, by Imperial Age, this ability looks weak to the point of being almost completely useless, as these villagers would have low range and max out at a pathetic 1 damage against nearly every enemy unit, and would also lack the added survivability of Inca, Spanish, Polish, or Bohemian villagers. There might be some occasional situational benefit to fighting back against very small numbers of enemies, but for the most part your time and attention would be better spent doing a variety of other things, from fielding defensive units to just sending your villagers to safety, especially given the recent streamlining of that feature. So let's see if we can find a happy medium where the bonus isn't broken or rage-inducing in the early game, or useless and yawn-inducing by late game. Now there are a few things to keep in mind that can mitigate some of the apparent imbalance of this idea. The main one being that while standard villagers currently deal melee damage, ranged villagers ought to deal pierce damage, at least to be visually and logically consistent. This would also help balance them in the early game, as pierce armor is more common than melee armor, so even scouts or skirmishers with no upgrades, or loomed villagers, would only take 1 damage from a base pierce attack of 3, instead of the 3 or 2 that a melee villager would deal. Unupgraded militia line units would take 2 damage, or just 1 if they had the first armor upgrade. Even so, the ability to attack at range is powerful, and even ranged villagers dealing only 1 damage could be strong in the very early game, as you can still attack with several units at once, and at a time before enemy ranged units or scouts can come into play. So this doesn't completely wave away the early game balance concerns, but it does soften them quite a bit. We could also make use of the feature I discussed in my previous video, wherein ranged villagers would become less powerful if fighting away from your base, which I think is a concept with a lot of promise. But I want to see if we could effect this as a standalone bonus, so we'll keep the aura effect as a spare arrow in the quiver for now, a plan B for balance if it's required. Other mitigating factors are the low speed of villagers, meaning they're slower than militia line units even if you have wheelbarrow and they don't have squires. And the attack delay on villagers is a bit longer than on archers or other ranged units. Finally, of course, is the lack of an auto-attack feature, so whatever the theoretical potential of ranged villagers, as showcased in earlier videos with maximum focus on micro, the practical effectiveness is limited by your ability to target each individual enemy unit. As for how we might go about this, we'll explore 2 options, the first being progressive and driven by civ bonuses, and the second being applied all at once via a unique technology. The advantage of the bonus approach is that it gives you most or all of the game to use this ability, rather than something you wouldn't consider until late Castle Age, and the disadvantage is that it would be harder to design and balance. In terms of a progressive bonus, it's natural to think of villagers gaining a certain amount of attack and range per age. I'll be exploring a variation of that where villagers are affected by many, but not all technologies that apply to archers. For instance, the fletching line, chemistry, ballistics, possibly even thumb ring. But certainly missing out on the armor technologies, as that would lead to a novel glass cannon type identity for these villagers, instead of the existing 4 bonuses that, among other things, all improve their toughness. So one example of how this might be done is that villagers benefit doubly from all offensive archer techs, but start with low attack and range stats. Let's say just 1 attack and 1 range, with 2 bonus damage against animals. Although you might consider adding 1 to either range or attack if you think that at any point further down the line the villager's range or damage is too low, or that a unit with a projectile weapon but only 1 range looks too silly in Dark Age. Keep in mind that in practical terms, for some key unit interactions, this is not a meaningful damage nerf relative to having 3 Pierce attack, as these villagers will still only do 1 damage to loomed enemy villagers or scouts. When you research fletching, remembering that the bonus is for double effect on villagers, their Pierce attack and range rise to 3. This is significantly worse than an archer with fletching with 5 attack and range, lower attack delay, and higher speed, although archers do have less HP and armor. So while you could take that fight, it's often not going to be the best choice. Against enemy scouts, skirmishers, villagers, and militia line units with 1 armor upgrade, you would still do only 1 damage, although with a group of villagers able to attack at once. So at this point, it's more of an interesting trade-off than just an all-around better version of rangeless villagers with their 3 melee attack, and is favorable as a defensive bonus, as large groups of villagers working together will be better able to defend themselves than small groups of forward villagers, which can be picked off easily enough by enemy scouts or even militia. In Castle Age, you have the opportunity to research Bodkin Arrow, again for double effect, giving your villagers 5 attack and range. Again, very much overshadowed by a Bodkin Crossbowman with 7 range and attack, but with a respectable defensive capacity, and doing 2 damage to knights or to scouts and light cavalry with 1 armor upgrade. If we choose to have the villagers benefit from Thumb Ring as well, they could gain further micro potential with an increased attack rate. In Imperial Age, assuming that the Civ gets Bracer and Chemistry, we go up to 7 range and attack, or after Chemistry, 7 range and 9 attack, allowing these villagers to have capabilities that are not made completely obsolete by powerful Imperial Age units. Although of course they will be eclipsed in terms of practical usage by Arbalesters, Siege, Cavalry, and other military units with better stats, as well as the all-important auto-attack ability, whereas ranged villagers have to be microed relentlessly to benefit from their ability. Unless this appear too strong in Imperial Age, recall the important reference point of Commanderan crossbows, though with less attack and hit points, but with the same range, more easily masked, and with auto-attack that makes them much more useful as trash archers. So in order to not be useless in Imperial Age, ranged villagers probably ought to be in the ballpark of Commanderan crossbows, and probably even a bit better in terms of attack. Of course, there are many other possible implementations, such as not being affected by chemistry but starting with +1 base attack, benefiting from archer upgrades but with a delayed onset like the Inca bonus which takes effect in Castle Age, simply gaining a set amount of attack and or range per age, or a non-standard unique technology that is available outside the castle or even in Feudal Age, as well as the possibility of combining a bonus and technology as mentioned earlier. Now let's move on to implementing this as a unique technology, which is the easier method as we don't have to worry about early game exploits. Assuming a castle or Imperial Age technology, this would simply give the villager enough range and attack to provide sufficient damage output against the units of that age, with the option for further benefit by activating the application of archer techs. A reasonable range for the final stats might be 4 to 7 range and 7 to 9 attack, but anything less than 8 pierce damage would only do 1 damage against fully armored light cavalry or cavaliers. So I'd err on the higher end of that range, perhaps a final 6 range and 9 damage. Some behind-the-scenes accommodations would have to be made, including the addition of a new zeroed-out pierce attack for villagers, which would be raised to the appropriate value and the melee attack reduced upon researching this technology. Note that even with 0 melee attack, such villagers would have a bonus against rams with their negative melee armor, as is the case already with Chukonus and Scorpions. If you consider this a feature, it would play into the defensive intent of this bonus of countering ram pushes, and if you consider this a bug, it might be addressed with the Royal Heirs mechanic, whereby rams would take less damage from these villagers. There's also the question of what should be done about villager bonus damage against buildings, and for this bonus I think it should be reduced to 1 or 0. As hilarious as it would be, we don't need a revival of obsidian arrows for ranged villagers, and the civilization that gets this bonus should miss out on sappers. If I wanted to go nuts with this idea, I'd suggest a ranged melee toggle like the Wrath has, but ranged villagers are more than interesting enough on their own. So those are some of my thoughts on ranged villagers as a potential bonus or unique technology, and while it would likely require some tweaks, as does nearly every new edition, I think it's worth a shot. And I have to say that this bonus is just too fun to pass up. You can let me know which sort of implementation you think would be the most fun or balanced, or which existing or future civilization you think would be the best fit for this bonus. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Mandatum. Liken. Mandatum. Subscriben.
that's all for today. Till next time.